title got repeated and the word landmark has been used. As a writer, I would say, whatever decisions which have come in recent times, I have listed in this paper. I would not say this is the complete list. Nor I would say these are only significant. But I can say these decisions have some practical relevance, at least to our place when we are practicing. I am sure this deliberation will be enriching every one of us for the reason that it can be interactive, it will be educative, we can exchange our views. This month of April, we were busy in bank holiday. In May, normally, SARC organizes a lot of residential programs in hill stations for educating ourselves with relaxation. But what I found this time is, even from the month of April, we had to be on guard this year because of certain developments. First and foremost is the notification of ICDS, the Income Computation Disclosure Standards. In fact, I do not know to what extent we have focused on ICDS, but that is going to really make our practice horrible. This is 10 accounting standards, 10 income computation standards. They don't call it as accounting standard, they call it as income computation disclosure standards. Firstly, they say it is only for computing income from business or profession or income from other sources, not for other heads of income. And it is for those who are following mercantile system accounting. Third driver is, wherever the statutory provision is clear, this accounting standard will pave way for the statutory provision to apply and ICDS will not apply. And most importantly, many of the requirements or contents in the disclosure standard are meant to upset settled decisions. So before going to the paper, I thought I will have sort of an introduction as regards the development. See, this disclosure standard does not ask you to make anything. Only for the limited purpose of income computation, these standards have to be applied. Income has to be adjusted or modified or altered. Just to quote one. In the case of contractors, with which we are very familiar, retention money is not taxable. For the reason, the contractor should get satisfied with the performance of the contractor. Only then the money can be released. But if you see in ICDS, they say the retention money is taxable. Similarly, in the case of service contracts also, you have to go by proportionate completion method. With regard to inventory valuation, the standard says you have to follow LIFO method. FIFO method. Sorry. Then as regards interest income, it has to be computed on time basis. So where interest is doubtful of recovery, in revenue recognition we used to postpone the recognition of income. Now it is to be on time basis. With regard to assets, capitalization of interest. With regard to conversion of foreign exchange assets, if there is gain, you have to offer as income. If there is loss, you should not recognize. So many changes. Very simple, I will tell you. When the firm is dissolved, we value the stock at cost or market price. Not at market price, not at cost. This is because of the very old ALA firm decision. But we have a local case, Shakti Trading Company decided by Supreme Court, where the firm is dissolved and the surviving partners continue the business of the firm. When will the firm get dissolved firstly? A firm will get dissolved by agreement or upon the death of the partner if the agreement does not provide for such eventuality. So we make a deal. Death of the partner shall not dissolve the firm and the surviving partners can continue the business of the firm to overcome that dissolution. In Shakti Trading Company, what they said, even if there is dissolution, if the surviving partners are going to continue the business, inventory need not be valued at market price. Now in accounting standard, ICDS, they say it has to be valued only at market price. So like this, wide ramifications are created because of ICDS. If I am right, many trade bodies are contemplating to get a sort of a stay against ICDS because ICDS is like backdoor entry to nullify court decisions. A delegated authority like CBDT, where they notify accounting standards by virtue of section 145, and they can upset many court decisions. It is like always win-win for revenue, nowhere for the taxpayer. For example, inventories, if you see, it is quite surprising. If the inventories will take 12 months time to become a saleable condition, that interest portion has to be capitalized. So 1/4/2015 onwards, if our clients are going to ask us anything which will have impact because of ICDS, we have to be on guard. Yet another issue I thought I will update is section 14A. Disallowance of expenditure incurred in respect of income which is not chargeable to tax. We had a lot of court decisions or appellate decisions, so to say, if there is no income, no disallowance will apply. But CBDT came out with a circular 5 of 2014, saying that even if there is no exempt income during the year, section 14A read with rule 8D has to be applied. If you closely look at rule 8D, it has 3 limbs. Expenditure directly attributable to earning exempt income. Then, with regard to indirect expenses, it takes only interest, proportionate interest portion. This rule 8D will apply only when the taxpayer claims no expenditure was incurred for earning that exempt income, and where the computation is not satisfactory in the opinion of the assessing officer, prompting him to do this calculation afresh. In this Finance Act 2015, when it was passed in Lok Sabha, some important amendments were brought in. In section 2 clause 24, a change has been brought in to tax waiver of amount. Any subsidy, concession, waiver, whatever name called, given by central government or state government or any authority or agency is taxable as income only where it relates to a fixed asset for which the actual cost is adjustable under section 43(1). All other subsidies are taxable as income. I am saying the section, tough, you know features, you can interpret it. I don't know what tough you can tell. So if you are getting a subsidy which is going to reduce your cost of acquisition, then it is not taxable. For example, the revenue subsidy. For example, we have a Kanyakumari Cooperative Society case law where subsidy was given to the society for the reason that it has given employment to scheduled caste and scheduled tribe. So that is a taxable one. So this kind of, but luckily in section 2 clause 24 while they were amending it, they did not say waiver of amount by supplier of machinery or capital asset. So that Mahindra and Mahindra decision or Chetan Chemicals decision remains undisturbed. Similarly, in section 36, subsection 1, clause 3, interest on monies borrowed for the purpose of business is deductible. Provision to the section says if the money is borrowed for acquisition of capital asset for extension of business, then that portion of interest till the asset is put to use is recapitalized. But now in Finance Act, for extension of business they remove. So the impact is, any asset you buy till it is put to use, you have to capitalize the interest. Expansion is not a criteria. So any asset you buy, you have to capitalize the interest till it is put to use. Luckily, it does not cover inventories, because inventories they have given a rider 12 months time period. If the raw material or inventory, whatever is acquired, if it will take 12 months to convert into a saleable condition, then only interest has to be capitalized, not otherwise.
What about the gestation period?
What gestation?
If there is to be a capital asset, and the capital asset is being under construction,
Okay.
around
It has to be capitalized, it has to be capitalized. I told you, till it is put to use.
a windmill or a solar panel.
I said capital asset, you draw distinction between capital asset and stock interval. Even if you have any machinery for that matter, the position is the same. So why I am saying is, this amendment in section 36(1)(3) will have impact in our practice. Then yet another provision, further proviso to section 36(1)(7) dealing with bad debts. We all know bad debt is a deduction which in the last 2 decades or so you can claim the moment you write off in the books. But now a further proviso is added to say bad debt is deductible even without write off in the books. Provided, they are given a condition, provided the income is chargeable to tax because of ICDS. I told you initially, interest income is chargeable to tax on time basis, so you have to offer it as income. Now you can call it as bad debt and write off in your adjusted account. So both you need not make an accounting entry. So in the case of banks, for NPA, you will not recognize interest because of the prudential norms. But income tax will compel you to admit it as income because of the revenue recognition, ICDS. But because of further proviso, you can again say it is written off as bad debt, no accounting entry is required. So this sort of complications, so to say, are increasing in the recent times. And we have to grapple with this situation. Now let me go to the first slide. On the face of it, you know, it is dealing with income from house property. Section 22 says income from house property. Again, in respect of let out of buildings or lands appertaining thereto, of which the assessee is the owner, other than the portions used for business or profession, the income from such property is chargeable under the income from house property. So the catch words are buildings or lands appertaining thereto, of which the assessee is the owner, other than the portion annual value. How to determine annual value? It has 3 limbs. The first part, the sum for which the property might reasonably be expected to let from year to year, which we call it as fair rent. The second one, you let out to get rent which is more than the fair rent. The third, clause C says where the property is vacant, because of that the let out rent is less than the fair rent, such amount. Now in this Moni Kumar Subba case, which is the precedent for the other one, the assessee admitted only 90,000 per month as rental income for a property and received 10 crores as interest-free refundable advance. The Delhi High Court full bench said the assessing officer is not justified in straight away putting 12% notional interest. He should have ascertained the fair rent of the property. That exercise he has not carried out. In this tip-top typography case, similarly the assessee admitted only 3,60,000 as rental income and received 5 crores as interest-free refundable advance. The assessing officer determined the fair rent by adding notional interest. The matter went to the High Court. The High Court held the assessing officer, if he is unable to accept the rent as fair rent, he himself should carry out the investigation. He should do an inquiry. He should ascertain what is fair rent. He has to go to the field, see a comparable property, what is the rent. Or if the property is liable for standard rent, that standard rent he has to adopt. If the standard rent is not available, then you must ask the assessee to get the standard rent determined under the rent control laws. So it said the municipal value of the property is not binding on assessing officer. The assessing officer has to carry out an independent investigation to arrive at the reasonable rental value of the property and then fix up the value. Friends, this case law I took because in our place we come across instances where the property is almost like a sale or the property owner is running short of money. So we can visualize a situation where you take a huge amount as refundable deposit and have a token amount as rent, in which case even if the assessing officer is going to adopt or investigate the fair rent of the property, nothing is lost, at least the fund flow is assured. This advantage I thought I will highlight. In the course of this discussion, I thought we have in our town of late lot of hoardings on the top of the building. We all know hoardings on the top of the building, some rent is collected. Or even adjacent to your property, there will be a car garage. Adjacent to it, you may allow somebody to put up a cell phone tower. You may get a rent. All along, we were under the impression that the amount received by way of rent for putting up the hoardings is taxable as income under the other sources. But actually, only one court decision is there in 244 ITR 1 Mukherjee Estate Private Limited where it was said it is taxable under the other sources because you are being open terrace. But if you notice the definition, section 22 house property, the let out of building or lands appurtenant thereto. So even if there is a land adjacent to the building and on the top of the building, it will fall in the category of house property only. The very purpose of drawing your attention to this is that when you admit it as income on house property, you get 30% notional deduction. This advantage you will get if you admit it as a house property, not under the other sources. So this case law, my key point in this is that you can take a lump sum amount as rent-free advance, allow the tenant to remain there, and flow of fund will be available. And that will not impact your annual value. Let the assessing officer investigate and see the reasonable rent by making investigation in the surrounding places and fix up the rent. The next one. Please. Thanks, sir. The next one is doctrine of partial merger and complete merger. See, when we complete the assessment, this is the time we go on appeal also. There are 4 possibilities. One, after completion of assessment under section 143(3), you may get 148 notice. You may face 263. You may get 154. Or you yourself voluntarily go for 264. So the doctrine of merger is that when you go on appeal or when the superior authority makes an order, the order of the assessing officer gets merged. This is called doctrine of merger. To what extent the order is getting merged? This is called partial merger or complete merger. For example, 4 additions were made. You are going on appeal for 2 of the additions. For another 2 additions, whether you can go for 264 to the commissioner. See, the law is such, wherever it is favorable to the revenue, it has been amended accordingly. 264 you cannot go, it is a complete merger. The moment it has been appealed, no other issue you can go to the commissioner under section 264. Coming to 263. If the commissioner appeals, passes an order, whether commissioner can invoke 263. See, 263 can be invoked by commissioner subject to some time limits. If the appellate commissioner CIT appeals has discussed an issue, that part CIT cannot touch because partial merger takes place. In respect of other issues, he can invoke 263. But when you have filed an appeal, with regard to those issues, can CIT do 263 in respect of those issues also? Section 263 is drafted in the past tense. It says the matter had been appealed against and had been disposed of by the CIT appeals. In respect of other issues, CIT can invoke 263. It is not in present tense. When the appeal is pending, whether CIT can do 263. In fact, this is one of the issues. Recently I had a discussion wherein it was found finally, when the matter is pending before the appellate authority, you must allow the appellate authority to exercise its jurisdiction. CIT is superior to CIT appeals, but CIT should not interfere when the matter is pending in CIT appeals. So this case in Lar Chemicals, the assessment was completed in June 2006 under section 143(3). With some additions, read in section 148. In March 2009, the commissioner wanted to invoke 263. The time limit for revision under section 263 is 2 years from the end of the financial year in which the order was passed. So June 2006, now March 2009. So June 2006 means 2007 March, 8 March, 9 March. 2 years from the end of the financial year in which the order was passed. So the commissioner had time for revision under section 263. But the issue is, he cannot go to other issues other than reassessment. That was the contention. See, with regard to issues which were dealt with in reassessment, he had time. But in respect of other issues, he was precluded from doing revision. So, when an assessment is made, only in respect of those issues only 263 can be done, not in respect of other issues. That's what the Bombay High Court has held in this case. So what I am saying is that 263 gives you a protection. If the assessing officer makes an addition based on your familiarity or proximity or whatever reason, just to protect yourself, you can file an appeal. By that, you can elongate the time and extort the commissioner from using 263. Because till the appeal is pending, 263 cannot be invoked. I told you initially. So you file an appeal, make the CIT stop from doing 263. But there is one attendant risk, I would say. In appeal, the assessment can be enhanced. So what? It is like a devil in the deep sea. To escape from 263, if you go for appeal under 246A, that CIT appeals may enhance the income. That risk will be there. But nevertheless, see, recently I came across a case where in a scrutiny assessment only 40,000 was a tax liability for a tax practitioner of our town. He was very particular that it should be appealed against. I told him only 40,000, don't waste your money. He didn't heed my advice, he went on appeal. The CIT appeals enhanced the assessment to 10 lakhs tax demand. So that risk is also there. But the point I am saying is, the doctrine of merger will allow you, for example, you file an appeal. Under section 154, you can prefer rectification in respect of matters other than those which are not subject matter of appeal. 154 does not bar you from filing a rectification petition even after filing the appeal. Only in respect of those issues you cannot go for 154. The next one. This is assessment. In Tata Metallics case, the assessee filed a return, got an intimation. He wanted to file a revised return. Whether intimation is an assessment. We had a lot of dispute to what extent intimation gives finality to the assessment. The Supreme Court in Rajesh Javeri Stockbrokers Private Limited case 291 ITR held the legislature has used two terms, intimation and assessment. In intimation there is no application of mind, only the ministerial staff of the department work. So you cannot call it as assessment. But even now CPC is processing the returns. Can we call intimation from CPC as assessment? Will receipt of intimation stop you from filing revised return? What is the time limit for filing revised return? 1 year from the end of the assessment year in which the return was filed. Subject to the condition the return was, or completion of assessment, whichever is earlier, subject to the condition that the original return was filed before 139 one day. So whether intimation will stop you from filing a revised return? See, after the change, this intimation allowing prima facie adjustment, limited prima facie adjustment, no adjustment, acknowledgement is equal to assessment, all this confusion we had about a decade or so. Last year, the CBDT in November 2014, circular number 17, in the context of filing application before the Settlement Commission, said intimation is not an assessment. Even then the case is pending. What is the basic condition for going for a Settlement Commission? The case should be pending. So an intimation will not close the case case continues to be pending. In that sense they said intimation is not an assessment. So from that we can draw an interpretation to say intimation does not close your door, you can file a revised return. In fact, there is one old Bombay High Court decision, Anderson Marine Lines, some 256 ITR or so, wherein also it has been said that intimation is not an assessment. So therefore, if you want to file a revised return in appropriate cases, the purpose of taking the case I have to justify. So whenever you file a return and you feel something is missed out, merely because you get intimation, don't stop yourself, you can file a revised return, provided you have time. 1 year from the end of the financial year in which the return was filed, and the basic condition is it should have been filed before the due date specified in section 139(1). So this advantage you can take. The next one is Amarnath Agarwal. This is about reassessment. See, for reassessment there are 3 sections, section 148, 149 and 151. 148 says issue of notice where the assessing officer has reason to believe. 149 says the quantum of income. See, basically section 143 2 notice and 148 notice they have to compare and contrast. 143 2 notice has to be served before the specified date, whereas 148 notice mandated by 149 is required to be issued. It is not, need not be served. The moment the assessing officer issues a 148 notice, 149 is satisfied. Coming to 149, 149 prescribes the monetary limit for reopening the assessment. Earlier we had 2, now we have 3. Up to 1 lakh reopening of assessment is possible. A period of 4 years from the end of the relevant assessment year in which the income escaping assessment is suspected. Where the income escaping assessment is more than 1 lakh, the time limit is 6 years. Now recently they added the third one where if a person has foreign asset, the time limit is 16 years. Now, in this case, the assessee filed a return, it was completed. After 4 years, 148 notice was issued. Two conditions are to be satisfied for 148. One, there must be an escapement of income. Two, quantification of escapement. Three, failure on the part of the assessee where the notice is sought to be issued after 4 years. So 4 years had elapsed, but 148 notice was issued. See, with regard to issue of notice, section 151 has to be looked into. Where assessment has been completed under section 143(3), after the expiry of 4 years, JSC has to permit. So in this case, the assessee contested, you are giving a notice after 4 years. The basic condition is you suspect or you have reason to believe escapement of income of more than 1 lakh. But there was no quantification in the records of the department. So the assessee filed a writ saying that you say the income escapement is more than 1 lakh, but you have no reason, you have not recorded the same. See, in small places such as ours, issue of 148 notice is done indiscreetly. In fact, one of the officers, when he quit, he wanted to issue 125 notices under section 148. I do not know whether he has issued. Just before leaving, he wanted 125 notices to issue. See, when 4 years have elapsed, it becomes compulsory that quantification of the income escaping assessment is a must. Without quantifying, it is not possible to issue a notice under 148. That too when 4 years have elapsed from the end of the relevant assessment year. So this I thought in the recent times the courts are supporting the taxpayers because so many notices are issued recklessly, putting the assessees in hardship. In fact, today I read in DTR where the assessing officer wanted to verify exchange of shares between companies, but he was not having any data before him, but he issued a notice. On the writ, the Bombay High Court in Navi India Limited, today's DTR it has come. The court held, no, you cannot make a roving inquiry. You established there was escapement of income assessable to tax. Only when there is escapement of income you can issue 148, not otherwise. So friends, the purpose of taking this case law to your notice is that if 4 years have elapsed from the end of the relevant assessment year, you ensure you give your reply, ask for reasons. But if the reasons, if they have not quantified the escapement of income as more than 1 lakh, then you can contest the same. Each case law, when I say, it has to have some practical application. So for this I am saying when you receive 148 notice, kindly go through what is the escapement of income, has it quantified immediately. There are yet another Allahabad High Court decision where also 363 ITR, there also it has been stated quantification compulsory. Next.
I received the intimation. After that, I filed one, but they have raised demand. I filed a solicitation. I have filed a immediately.
See, we have given 154, then we would have gone for appeal. 154 when it is rejected.
That's the software problem.
Okay.
Because 50% salary. So they are not considered 50%.
What 50%?
Property income. They are
Half share only.
yes. Because after that, they have amended PAN number of the co-owners will be mentioned in the software. While filing letters, such provision was not available in the software, computer software.
See, when you go for 154, you say it is rectification of assessment. You yourself say it is an assessment. You file once again 154, file it properly.
Yeah, they are
Multiple 154 you can put. You put on one more 154 properly, then by time go on appeal. That is better. That should be a better proposition than filing a revised return. Do you have time for revised return?
yes.
For which assessment?
Just within 5 days. I filed the return in July.
Okay.
After 3 months, I received the intimation. Immediately, I filed 151. Within 50 days, I received that it is rejected because demand is raised again. So I tried to wait. Yeah, since I have got time, sufficient time within the penalty year, I filed the revised return.
264? 139. See, when you ask for rectification of an order means you are asking somebody to apply their mind. They have applied their mind. I feel it is debatable. I will say, see, I also, see, I had,
Again, they will say, because
See,
one demand 40 lakhs.
Excuse me, sir.
I have filed
You
five
can
lakhs.
apply for 8 bar 2015 notification. CPD.
it's software problem. In the July.
8 bar 2000.
can you explain, sir?
8 bar
Can you
2015.
explain what is it, sir?
14
The van number of the co-owner is not mentioned. After March, they only added a van number of the co-owner. While they are processing the estimate, they will reject for a number of cases, about 5 or 6 cases. For all cases, I will done
See, which software do you
demand
use,
is 2
sir?
lakhs, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000.
See, I used Winman. Up to 23/7 there was some snag in the software. I got 13 cases where demands were doubled. If I say income as 1,80,000, it was taken as 3,60,000. Then for all we filed 154, and all they have cleared.
I am one problem, sir. Agricultural loan is treated as income and they are giving out your loan.
Where do you put the agricultural income? When you put it in other classes.
Income comes they are treated as the income and they are putting it tax. This is going on.
See, this happened initially we had where ATC deduction was omitted to be given.
Yeah.
So we furnished evidences way back in 2008 or 9 from CPC. Now these days I think this, I checked up with Winman also. They said there was some technical error in our software. Then they pleaded the inability to correct the same. Then 13 cases I had, all 13 we applied one after another. In some cases the demand was 5 lakhs. So it was a bit jittery for us to start with, but we completed. So what I would say is you rectify once again you give 154. But when you give rectification, you should see that time you are doing correctly. It is also important. If you continuously err, then they will not respond also. After all, it is machine based. So you have to follow the procedure, how you are doing it, we check it out. Or in case you are not getting it next time, based on that order, by the time go on appeal, better you will get the justice. This is about receipt from franchise. See, the assessee in this case, Tamil Nadu Tourism Development Corporation was, you all know, is running so many hotels in various places. They were incurring losses in some of the units. They let out some 30 such units and offered the income as income from house property. The very purpose is to claim the 30% reduction. And the quantum was in the range of some 50 lakhs reduction alone. You can imagine the rent, it should be around 1.6 crores. So the matter, the CIT appeals held, it is taxable as income from house property only because it has been let out. The tribunal went into the facts of the case and found that the assessee is continuing to do the business in respect of other units. For example, if they have 100 units, they have leased only 30 units and they were running 70. So the tribunal said the assessee is continuing to remain in business. It is not that it has closed down the business and the amount of rent received or franchisee amount received is taxable under the head business only, and the 30% reduction is not to be allowed. The matter went to the Madras High Court. The court looked into the agreement. The agreement stipulated the franchisee has to maintain, register under Shop and Establishments Act, must have quality food, maintenance of building, then provident fund, labor welfare measures, how the board has to be painted. It has to put Tamil Nadu Tourism Development Corporation in bold letters, the franchisee name in small letters. That should be more prominent. There are 33 conditions saying that it has to be followed. It is not a simplicity of just letting out a building. So the court held it is not a passive let out of building. It is to exploit the available facilities, and the TTDC wanted to maximize its income by allowing the franchisees. Therefore, it is taxable under the head business only, not under the house property. So when we, assuming you are going to lease out your business, it is better we bifurcate the lease into two, one for premises, one for other assets. For example, you are going to lease out a hotel. The hotel premises you give it to A, and the other movables you give it to Mrs. A. So that part of the rent attributable to A is a passive let out of premises. You can claim 30%. And with regard to movables which you let out to Mrs. A, if you are owning the assets, you can claim depreciation. In case you are allowing only how the business is to be conducted, only terms and conditions you are giving, no other code, you offer it under that business. So this case law throws light on the fact that overall view, what are the governing conditions of the lease?
What about plant and machinery and all this?
See, if you are going to give together, then you cannot divide. That is why I said you give the building to A, give plant and machinery to Mrs. A.
That's not possible.
Why?
That A will be the between.
Sir?
It's a manufacturing industry.
Sir.
It doesn't have to take a manufacturer.
See, building as such, always any plant and machinery is severable from the land. It is not that it is embedded, unless it is an effluent treatment plant where you do some civil work also. So, it is, see, physical division, dismantling, then putting it is not a condition. See, if you are going to give only building and say plant and machinery is to so and so, building is to so and so, I think bifurcation of income is possible. But if it is inseparable, then as you said, it is not possible.
It will be a business.
Yes, business income. Next. This is about capital gain. Again, Madras High Court decision. Friends, recently, capital asset definition, you have an extended meaning for agricultural land. Now it is aerial distance we have to measure. In fact, when I checked with Erode and Chennai, it is only 335 kilometers, not 396. By train, it is 396. So aerial distance we have to see, and the distances and the population are given. But unfortunately, there is some confusion in 2 clause 14. It uses on the top of the proviso in any area within such distance aerially. So they have used the word in any area instead of the word municipality. This has caused confusion, though leading authors have given very clearly it is with reference to municipality, the distance and population has to be seen. But the section does not read like that. It says on the top of the clause in any area. If the legislature had put municipality, the confusion would not be there. Now coming to the point, in Saguntala Vedachalam's case, the assessee sold an agricultural land for 90 lakhs and did not offer to tax on the reasoning that it is an agricultural land and exempt asset, not a capital asset. Before the assessing officer, no evidence was produced. The assessing officer therefore assessed the same, saying it is a capital asset. We have not adduced any evidence to show that it is not a capital asset. The matter went to CIT appeals. CIT appeals, before CIT appeals, assessee gave Adangal extract, Chitta and Adangal. Can the CIT appeals entertain the new evidence? Rule 46A of the income tax rules permits entertaining of additional evidence by CIT appeals in situations such as one where the assessee was prevented by sufficient cause from producing the evidence, or the assessing officer has rejected the production of evidence, or the assessee could not produce the evidence at that point of time. So the CIT appeals admitted the additional evidence and called for remand report. These days CIT appeals, they cannot set aside the assessment because that power has been removed. So CIT has to either confirm, enhance, modify or reduce. He cannot set aside the assessment order. So what they do is they ask for remand report. When remand report was asked, the assessing officer confirmed that it is an agricultural land. Maybe the incumbent would have changed. The old officer would have said no. This officer said no, it is agricultural land only, I verified your case. And certificate from Tahsildar was also obtained. So CIT appeals allowed the case. Then the matter went to tribunal. The tribunal referred to Siddharth J. Desai, 139 ITR of Gujarat High Court, where some principles are given to characterize a land, whether it's an agricultural land or not. It is very exhaustive, 13 conditions. Some basic conditions are: one, what is the surrounding development of the land, whether the land is plotted, sold on yardage or acreage basis, whether any person will buy such land for such a price, whether it is worthy for agricultural operation, whether it is used for non-agricultural use, whether local permission is required, whether such permission was obtained, whether at all that land at any point of time was used for agriculture. If it is used now, is it temporary or stopgap? What is the return on investment on agriculture? Like this, some 13 parameters they have given. So the tribunal, what it did, it found that it is very high price. One condition it took. Said therefore, you are not eligible for exemption. Agricultural land you are selling for 90 lakhs. Therefore, it is taxable. It is not an agricultural land, they concluded. The matter went to Madras High Court. Being a jurisdictional High Court, it will be of use to us. The Madras High Court said the tribunal committed an error by looking into the conditions and saying even if one condition is not satisfied, it will fall into the taxable category. Actually, it is not so. It has to see all the conditions. So it was not sold on yardage or acreage basis. Surrounding areas it has not seen. It is agricultural land as per revenue records. Kist was also paid. So that was the key point which prompted the Madras High Court to say it is not chargeable to tax. But now in our place, with the amendment, we have to see how we are going to manage. The section reads in any area within such distance aerially. So in fact, a couple of days back, one assessee came to me saying that I am selling agricultural land for 1 crore. It is say some 20 kilometers from Erode municipality, nearer to some Vadakurichi or somewhere. He said, is it taxable or not taxable? Only one answer you can give. I said, it's not possible to say. Let me ascertain the indexed cost. Up to indexed cost, you are free. Beyond indexed cost, you have tax liability. That portion you will think what to do. If possible, you go for construction of residential building if you have only one house, or put it in bonds, or you go for yet another agricultural land. 54B is there. Why I am saying the ambiguity in law, though whether intended or unintended, nobody will do it intentionally. But ambiguity in law most of the time pushes us to think 50-50, not on one side. If it comes, what to do? For example, enhanced compensation. Enhanced compensation it is received. In some cases, people tend to forget it. They don't claim 50%. They claim only actual expenditure. When law allows you 50%, you should claim. I have come across a case where only the portion was claimed, not 50%. An opportunity was lost. For enhanced compensation, the statute provides for 50% reduction in respect of interest on enhanced compensation. So this Sakuntala Vedachalam case, main key point is, if the land is agricultural land as per revenue records and the kist is paid and reasonably cultivated, even if 13 conditions are exhaustive, one can have a favorable decision. The next is Ved Prakash Bhakra. This is a classic case. We may not be able to use it practically, all the points. There are 3 issues in this case.
This is from Karnataka.
Karnataka you don't want. You want water, but not Karnataka decision. Decision cannot come with water. So in this case, there are 3 points. One, the assessee got allotment of land by Bangalore Development Authority in the year 1977 and possession was also obtained. That assessee died, his 3 sons inherited. BDA executed the sale deed in the year 1987. A sale deed was executed in 87. 77 possession given. 87 registration was made. Sons put up a construction. Subsequently, they gave it to a builder, saying that we will demolish the building to take this land. make a construction, 50% you give us, you take 50%. There were three issues. One, when from indexation benefit is to be taken. Two, what is the sale consideration for computing capital gains? Three, how much exemption under what section? See, the first point is, they got it in 1977. They wanted fair market value of 1481 to be adopted. 1481 can be adopted if they had ownership as on 1481. But registration was done in 1987. So the revenue said, no, we will not give. Registration was done only in 87. Though possession was obtained in 77, you are not eligible for 1481. The assessee said, see 2 clause 47 subclause 5. Under section 53 of the Transfer of Property Act, if the possession is given, allowing enjoyment of property, I am become a owner, therefore I am eligible for exemption. Again the revenue said, no, that clause came into statute book only from 1488, whereas you got it in 87, you are not eligible. 77 they got possession, 87 registration, 1488 only the subclass 5 was inserted to 2 clause 47. The High Court said no. The possession was obtained, it has been it has come into the statute book on 1488. But merely because possession was obtained preceding that date, this section will not be prospective. Even he continues to hold even before that. Therefore, 1481 is to be given. Second, they entered into a joint development agreement whereby the builder took the land. In the agreement, he made an estimate. The cost of construction will be 1.20 crores total. And they are eligible for 50%, 60 lakhs. But the builder took 5 years to complete the construction, and the actual cost of construction was 2.86 crores. So the revenue said, we will take actual cost of construction of the builder. On that 50% we will take it as your sale consideration, not the agreement. The court held a no, saying that at the time of agreement, joint development agreement is an agreement for exchange. It's an exchange. You give land, I construct. Therefore, at that time the value was fixed, not the actual expenditure incurred for construction. It is the estimated cost of construction mentioned in the agreement is to be adopted. So again, that was also in favor of the assessor. It is to their advantage only. We have to survive only with business people. Then coming to the third one. See, this we may also hear in our practice. These three brothers demolished the building and gave it to the builder. But they wanted exemption under section 54. There the court said no, because you have demolished the building and gave vacant site to the builder, so you are not eligible for 54, go to 54F. The basic difference between section 54 and 54F is, just to reiterate or recollect, in 54 only capital gain you have to reinvest, in 54F net sale consideration has to be reinvested. So this third part was in favor of the revenue against the assessee, saying that you are not eligible for 54, go to 54F. So friends, this decision I selected because the estimated cost of construction declared in the agreement is the sale consideration, not the actual cost of construction to the builder. See, in our town, apartment culture has not come in full. But nevertheless, if you are going to come across a situation where the landowner and the builder are going to enter into an agreement, we can ensure that the amount mentioned in the joint development agreement is the sale consideration, not the actual cost of construction incurred by the builder, to be adopted for the landowner. Next. This is about section 50C. Friends, section 50C, we all know, has been in statute book for almost a decade, or slightly more than a decade.
When is taxable per capita?
Huh?
Let's get when it is taxable per capita. Handing over the.
Only that time, yes, only when it is handed over.
Not at the time of agreement.
Not that time of agreement.
Yeah, I have to pay the year means they question is that.
Yes, it's only. Yes. See, symbolic handover, symbolic completion or handing over is also possible. Give the key. Now coming to section 50C. This is a section we all know is widely used in a sense where the stamp valuation is more than the apparent consideration. Now both the vendor and vendee both are subjected to tax. Previously, to overcome 50C, it was converted into stock in trade and it was sold. Now that has been blocked by inserting section 43CE. Now in this case, Appadura Vijayaraghavan, the SSC entered into an agreement for sale of land for 1.6 crores, 1.7 crores. And he was paid in installments. He got some 20 lakhs first. He had to pay SIPCOT. Then subsequently after 2 years he got 50 lakhs. He paid Catholic Syrian Bank. So it was indicative of the fact that he was in distress. Finally, when the sale deed was executed, Stamp Valuation Authority fixed the value at 3.2 crores, though the apparent consideration as per document was 1.7 crores. And it is not supported by any registered sale agreement or anything. Now the SSC said, I am offering, these are the facts. The value adopted by Stamp Valuation Authority is excessive. He only said, I claim the value adopted by Stamp Valuation Authority is excessive. The assessing officer ignored his letter and completed the assessment. The court said, when the SSC says the value adopted by Stamp Valuation Authority is excessive, that itself is adequate for the assessing officer to make a reference to valuation officer. He need not tell or protest or contest. The moment he says it is excessive, the assessing officer is supposed to make a reference. He cannot complete the assessment. Then distress sale. To what extent the valuation officer will look into the distress of the seller? Will he give concession? For example, X is in very bad shape. He is selling a property. He said distress sale. Will that factor be counted while valuing the property? This is quite interesting. In fact, there is yet another precedent for this case in Muthuraja, same Madras High Court, wherein in distress sale, the aspect of distress has to be considered. So the court held the assessing officer, without making reference to valuation officer under section 50C2, cannot complete the assessment. So the point which I want to throw because of this case law is that when you feel the Stamp Valuation Authority has adopted an excessive value, even if you have missed the bus, for example, you have not protested to the AO, if you have conveyed, that is adequate to contest at a later date that the AO has omitted. Even if you have missed somewhere, you can catch up by citing this case law and seeking a continuation petition, file an appeal before CIT appeals and bring back the case alive. Next. This is carry forward of loss. It is again another Karnataka High Court decision. We all know a loss cannot be carried forward unless the return is filed in time. But not all losses. Business loss, loss from speculation, loss under the head capital gains. In respect of other sources, maintaining race horses, that loss alone, not all other losses. Only for these 4 items, the return has to be filed within the time prescribed in section 139(3), which is parametry of 139(1). Now this is a case where the SSC admitted income of 5 lakhs and filed a return beyond 139(1) date. So it's a 139(4) return, say 5 lakhs. In the assessment, the assessing officer determined the income at 74 lakhs loss. Assessee says income 5 lakhs. Assessing officer determines it as loss 74 lakhs. Up to this, no problem. But return was filed beyond the due date. Subsequently, the assessing officer in haste gives 154, saying that I have determined the loss, but you are not eligible for carry forward. So now the matter went to the High Court. The court had, so far as the assessee is concerned, he has filed the return declaring positive income. It is valid. You have determined the loss. He is not hit by section 80. He is not hit by section 80, which mandates filing of loss return before the due date to have the carry forward benefit. Therefore, it said he is not at fault. But friends, just I want to throw one question to you all. Can you visualize a situation where you admit a positive income, assessing officer determining a loss income? Is it possible?
India.
No, we are talking only about India, we are not talking about Pakistan. We spoke enough about China.
Depreciation unclaimed by the assessing and
See, depreciation is not hinging on submission of return. Depreciation carry forward is not dependent on filing of return. Carry forward is an unfettered right. If you file the return.
It's only an advance.
Okay, sir. Even okay. Okay. Yes, but it is not a loss.
He cannot deny it carry over.
It is not a loss. So you can't call it a loss. It should be a loss. How? I do not know how. Factual. See, the unfortunate part in High Court decision is that they give only questions referred. Whether the tribunal is right or wrong, or whether the tribunal is justified. Like that only they give only a question, only that question they answer. But just they travel little bit to the facts of the case. Only tribunal discusses the facts thoroughly. High Court does not discuss facts so much.
That is
If-
what Kannada usually do.
I'm not making reference to it. See, I am on the other side of the table. I don't agree with it. I am on the other side, so I don't agree with your interpretation. Huh? So, in this case, yes, we are discussing only income tax case loss. So, the point I am making is, if the return is filed well in time, and if you have omitted to make a deduction, a real deduction, you have omitted to transfer a purchase to your trading account. Of course, the other point is, to get the loss determined, you have to go for 143.3. Loss will not be determined prima facie by filing a return. So the RDL of 143.3 you have to undergo to get the benefit of carry forward of loss. That aspect is there. So if you are admitting 5 lakhs income and the outcome is 70 lakhs loss, is after putting in so much of effort before they owe. It is not 143.1. In 143 you will not get that result. If it is a brought forward loss, no problem at all. Even if you have earned, you are eligible for carry forward. But facts were not thrown. Facts were not given as such. It was returned income 5 lakhs, determined that 75 lakhs loss. The next one. This is about educational institutions. Friends, when I say about educational institutions or charitable trusts, I want to draw your kind attention to section 11, section 6, which was inserted by Finance number 2 Act 2014, which says when the income is to be determined for accumulation or application or set apart for application in future, the cost of acquisition of any capital asset, if it is claimed, depreciation is not to be claimed. If you claim depreciation, then you cannot call it as application. This is per se, if you see the section, fine. But when you get to the practical side of it, this year when we are preparing the statement, for all the old assets, if you have already claimed as application, you cannot claim depreciation. Not only for fresh acquisition, for old, whatever old assets you have already in the books, if you have claimed it as application, you are not eligible for depreciation. If you have claimed depreciation, continue to claim depreciation. And this year you can take a chance. Whatever assets you want to show it as application, you can do. So far, old assets, whatever is remaining in the books in the case of non-profit organization, you have to take a call, you cannot claim depreciation. This is a point I thought. Previously, what was there? There was no embargo. Except in Kerala, we have lessee medical institutions where the Kerala High Court said you cannot claim capital asset acquisition as application and also depreciation. Both you cannot claim. Only Kerala High Court said like that. Now the legislature has brought in 11 subsections to say that if you claim application, no depreciation. If you say depreciation, no application. Either one of the two you can claim. Now coming to these cases, in Travancore Education Society, the trust applied for 12 AA registration and it was collecting capitation fee more than the regular fee. So while granting registration, the CIT refused registration saying collecting capitation fee. See, the assessee contested saying that, see, at the time of registration you cannot see all this. You will see only the genuineness. The assessee referred to one Madras High Court decision, New Evangelistic Association Society. That case law was referred to. But the court held, your application we are not seeing, your source of income we are seeing. That Madras High Court decision says, application is not to be verified at the time of registration, but source of income I can verify, very well verify at the time of registration itself. Since you are collecting capitation fee more than the prescribed fee, in addition to the prescribed fee, you are not eligible for registration. The next in the case of non-educational charitable trust is again a Kerala High Court decision. The SC was running a posh education institution for non-resident only, and they were charging 6,000 rupees per month for kindergarten, and they claimed it is meant for non-residents. So the court held it is apparent it is meant for profit making, it is not education. Accordingly, it was taken out. The third one is Queen's Educational Society. The Supreme Court held in the case of educational institutions, the overall view of the matter is to be seen. Merely because somebody is making profit, you cannot deny exemption. It said, if the profit is incidental, then exemption has to be given. So these three decisions I thought I will just highlight to you. And this year, in the case of charitable trust, we have another thorn in the flesh. Now, proviso to section 2 clause 15, charitable purpose, the further proviso previously gave a monetary limit of 25 lakhs in respect of any other object of general public utility. Now this year they have said it is 20%. So if a charitable trust is having any other object of general public utility, the income from such that should not exceed 20%. But let me take a practical case where a trust is running a Kalyana Mandapam and its only object is running that Mandapam, giving free, taking fees, whatever. Sometimes taking charges, sometimes we get free. There is no other activity for that trust. Okay sir, it is an advancement of any other object of general public utility, let me say. You are using it for charitable purpose. Partly used for charity, say, given free for free marriage, given for religious discourse or social reformation program, whatever you call it. 50% I am collecting money. My collection is only 10 lakhs. My expenditure is 3 lakhs. Previously, up to 25 lakhs, I could escape. Now, all the small charitable trusts are caught because they are falling in the fourth limb or the last limb of definition of charitable purpose. So this again, when we finalize the return for this year, we are going to encounter this problem. The next one. This is about partnership form. The first one is about the cash credit under section 68. See, we come across cases where partnership firms are formed with more number of partners to have a better capital. If you put 10 partners, each 1 lakh, 10 lakh will be the capital. If you put only 2 partners to reach 10 lakh capital, it will take time. Now the issue is, in the case of partnership firm, credit in the capital account of the partners, whether could be hit by section 68. So in this case, the SEC had 10 partners, only 4 were assessed to tax, balance 6 not assessed to tax. Their capital was in the range of 70 lakhs. The assessing officer said, others are not assessed to tax, they don't have source of income, their capacity to contribute capital we don't agree, therefore it is taxable in the hands of the firm. Now the court made a distinction between contribution of capital at the time of commencement of business and contribution of capital during the course of business. When capital is contributed at the time of commencement of business, the firm cannot be burdened with tax because the partners have put the money. Firm has not started the business, therefore you cannot tax.
There is no revenue.
But when the business capital is put in during the course of business, it is possible to make an inference that the surplus income of the firm is brought in the guise of capital contribution to the partners. So, as a protective measure, I would say it is better to have partnership firms in a place such as ours where this is the most prominent form of organization. They have wider or more number of partners, they have better capital base to do the business. The next one is Muthoot Financials. This is as regards penalty for contravention of the provisions of section 216 SS and T. In this case, the partners gave money, took back money from the firm so many times. In fact, for 4 assessment years, in each of the years, the loan contravention was more than 2 crores. So he went to the High Court. The court took note of 3 decisions. One is Ramniklal Kotari, a very old decision of Supreme Court. And another is Saini Pharmacy of Punjab and Haryana High Court. And Lokpat Film, Rajasthan High Court. 3 decisions. To say, a partnership firm is a noun to express the plurality of persons owning the firm. In the case of Ramniklal Kotari, the Supreme Court said, the business of the firm is business of the partners, profits of the firm is profits of the partners. And the partners pleaded, they were not aware. They gave money to the firm, withdrew money from the firm so many times. And they said they had a reasonable cause that they believed it is not contravention to the legal provision. So the court held it is a reasonable cause, that belief, a genuine belief is a reasonable cause to bail them from penalty. Friends, actually section 216 SS was introduced to block use of unaccounted money in the guise of loans. So whenever a loan is credited in the books, it is incumbent on the part of the assessing officer first to ascertain the genuineness of loan. Once genuineness is satisfied, then contravention should come. But coming to contravention, I would say it is only a technical breach. When the loan is genuine, there is no black money involved in it. When you have confirmed the genuineness of the transaction, there is no reason to penalize the person. The next one. Setting up of business and commencement of business. See, we all know a business when it is set up, and we cannot interpret exactly what is set up. But we know what is commencement of business. See, go to section 2, clause 34, previous year. Previous year means previous year defined in section 3. So previous year is not defined in section 2. It is defined in section 3 only. If you go to section 3, previous year means the financial year preceding the assessment year. Proviso says, in the case of business, from the date of setting up of business, not commencement of business. As they use the expression setting up of business. So by law, they are not recognizing commencement of business. They want to start the taxation of income from setting up of business and not commencement of business. So we need to have a distinction between what is setting up of business and what is commencement of business. See, I can visualize 3 stages. Purchasing raw material stage 1, manufacturing stage 2, marketing stage 3. So purchasing raw material is stage 1, that time itself, whatever expenditure I incur, I am eligible to claim. Say staff salary, rent, traveling, electricity, telephone charges. Now in CAR 4, WC and C India Private Limited case, assessing a multinational meant for trading operations in India, it borrowed huge money and incurred huge expenditure, but there was no sale at all during the year. It incurred a loss of about 9 crores and had income of some 36 lakhs worth of interest on surplus funds. And claimed net loss of 8.65 crores. So the matter went to the court. The court said the legislature has recognized only setting up of business and not commencement of business. When the business is set up, expenditures are eligible for deduction. So all the expenditures were allowed as deduction. In the next case of Dhumaketu Builders, the assessing subsidiary of DLF, it borrowed some 176 crores from DLF to apply for a tender. And the tender was not successful, it got back the money with the interest of some 60 lakhs and had to pay about 1.8 crores as interest to the parent company and claim net loss of 1.2 crores. The revenue held, you are a real estate dealer, you have put tender, but you are not successful. Not even one sale was there, therefore I will not allow the deduction. There the court made reference to Western India Vegetable Products case, 25 ITR, if my memory is right, to say that setting up of business is a key requirement, not commencement of business. So therefore, once the business is set up, you can claim all the expenses. There can be a time interval between setting up of business and commencement of business. I said 3 processes. You buy raw materials, 2 you manufacture, 3 you market. The moment you buy raw materials, the business is set up. It is ready to take off. Therefore, setting up business is the key word, not the commencement of business. Next. Friends, these are the new additions which I made specially for our place, which I did not discuss in your card. I have some more time to do it, sir? Okay. Now the first one is McDowell and Company Limited. We all know McDowell, a very old case law, dealing with tax planning or tax evasion or colorable devices. Now this is the assessee gave factory on lease because it had problem with its laborers. After 7 years, the assessee wanted to take back the factory. But lessee said, I have more time, I will not give, I want to do the business. This McDowell company paid 5 crores based on arbitration award, and I want to repossess my factory and continue the business. Even otherwise it was doing business elsewhere. Not that it discontinued the business. Business A was being conducted, business B was repossessed by paying 5 crores. The issue was whether the amount paid is a capital expenditure or revenue expenditure. See, as usual in CIT, appeals will say something, tribunal will say something. The matter went to High Court. The fact that CIT has prepared an appeal means the tribunal has given a favorable decision to the assessee. Because that is why CIT has gone to High Court. The court held the payment is not to facilitate your trading activity or your day-to-day management or efficiency in operation or better productivity. It is altogether to do a business of enduring nature. So you want to repossess the factory building. And altogether you are going to start an activity. Already you are having activity. But this is not just to have a smoothening effect, not to overcome the hurdles. It is much more than that. Therefore, it is a capital expenditure. The next one is Commercial Construction Private Limited. This is an extension of retention money I told you initially. The assessee in this case did not receive retention money from the contractee because satisfactory note has not been issued. The assessee said, I will give bank guarantee, please release my retention money. So, taking bank guarantee, the retention money was released. The issue before the court was whether the retention money received is acceptable. The court held, see, you have to only tax the real income, not a hypothetical income. I have given bank guarantee, by virtue of bank guarantee only you have given income, it is a contingent. Tomorrow if it is not satisfactory, I have to refund you. So based on bank guarantee, you have paid the money. Therefore, it is not chargeable to tax. Next. This is leasehold land and premises. We all know where the building is constructed in a leasehold building. As per explanation section 32, the lessee is taken as deemed owner and is eligible for depreciation only. So I take a building on lease basis. I take building on lease basis. I do extension of building. I am deemed owner. I can only claim depreciation. Now in the case of Premalata, SC took land on lease basis and constructed a building and claimed it is a revenue expenditure. As I said, I have not taken building on lease, I have taken land. In land I am putting a construction. The court said, when land is taken and building is put up, the ownership is only of the building, not the land. It is deductible as revenue expenditure. Okay. That portion was let out and she earned some rental income. Under what head it is taxable? She has put up the entire structure. In our place, we come across cases where husband holds the land, wife constructs a building, or wife holds the land, husband constructs a building. Now it is let out. In what head such rental income is taxable? I told you section 22 says let out of lands, buildings or lands appertaining thereto, of which the assessee is the owner. So the court held the land does not belong to you. It belongs to the other person who are only having leasehold rights on the land. Only building is yours. So your capacity is not owner. It is taxable under the head business, not under the house property. So this can somewhat, it can puzzle us. But one point I can say is, if you take land on lease and put up a construction, claim it as revenue expenditure. At least you will have the right to carry forward. Even if it is going to be denied, nothing wrong in it. So claim it as revenue expenditure. You have Madras Auto Service case 233 ITR Supreme Court. Actually that decision says a lessee when he incurs expenditure. The amendment was brought in to nullify that court decision, but unfortunately it did not address it properly. The explanation now says leasehold of building, not land. Therefore, if you have leasehold of building and extend it, you will become owner. If you have leasehold of land and if you put up a construction, you can call it as revenue expenditure altogether. The next one is Coromandel fertilizers. Similarly, we come across cases where the landlords give a hall like this, not fully decorated on rent as per lease agreement. The tenant does some partitions, improvements. Whether the tenant can claim this as revenue expenditure or should he claim depreciation on the improvement. Here also, the same High Court, Telangana and Andhra Pradesh High Court said, when the tenant incurs an expenditure, it is not a capital expenditure. And the partitions, for example, we come across some showrooms where building is given, internal ambience is created by the tenant, and some partitions are given, wooden partition or false ceiling ability. So all these can be claimed as revenue expenditure. Next. This is about reopening of assessment. This is PP engineering work. This is a classic case which I thought I will highlight to you. With regard to reassessment, I told you section 148, 149, 151, but I did not say about 150. See, 150 says beyond time limitation. See, actually in PP engineering case, the tribunal, while deciding the case of 2001 to assessment year, said some cash credits are not taxable in this year, you will tax it in 2000, 2001. So it said 68 addition is not to be made in this year, it should be made in the preceding year. Now in 2009, 148 notice was issued for the assessment year 2000, 2001. So what will happen? For assessment year 2000, 2001, 6 assessment years will complete by 2007. But in 2009, a notice was issued. Commissioner appeals, tribunal both held yes, it is barred by limitation, reopening is invalid. But the court held, refer section 150, where an assessment is made giving effect to the order or direction of the appellate authority, the time limitation will not apply. So this I thought I will highlight, because in tribunal when you get a decision for not for this year, for some other year it is taxable, then the entire time limitation will go. The 6 years or 7 years will not be counted, they can give notice later on also. The next one is Alana Sons Limited, Deputy CID, where whether reassessment is possible based on subsequent decision of tribunal or high court. See, we come across some case where 143 is accepted by officer and we have presented facts so nicely, he has completed the case. Subsequently, there is a jurisdictional high court decision saying that such expenditure is not allowable. Now, whether based on subsequent judgment of the jurisdictional high court or Supreme Court, whether 148 can be reopened. Here in this case, the Bombay High Court held it is not possible, because when the order was passed, it is in accordance with law. The subsequent judgment of tribunal or high court cannot prompt the tax officer to reopen the assessment. The last one. This is about the last one, which I feel is really relevant to our city now. See, we come across cases where tax is deducted at source. Tax is deducted at source, but it is not reflected in 26 hours. As my friend said, Circular 8/2015, a long procedure is prescribed, whether you agree with the demand or you disagree with the demand or partly agree with the demand, whatever. Then it is a case when the assessee was employed getting a salary income of 30 lakhs, TDS of about 6 lakhs, but no credit was found for about 5 lakhs. Now the assessing officer asked the assessee, the recipient of income, to pay tax. Why I am saying is, we go with practice and we lock the act book inside the cupboard. Section 205 very clearly says that the assessing officer cannot ask the payee to pay tax when tax is deducted at source. So, the moment we have a certificate that somebody has deducted tax at source on your income, you can challenge saying that section 205 does not allow the assessing officer to ask you to pay the tax. This case law also highlights the same thing. As per section 205, payee cannot be called upon to pay the amount of tax which has been deducted at source already. Friends, I think I have rushed through all these decisions. I am sure your interaction or your response to my presentation will be enriching me, and I am thankful to every one of you for the patient care.